Hey guys, tonight we begin the strange, almost unbelievable story of the shortest war in recorded history, a military conflict so brief that, if you made a cup of tea at the start of it, the war would be over before the water finished boiling. Historians still debate how something as serious as a war could begin and end in the span of just 38 minutes, leaving behind ruins, confusion, and a political map permanently rearranged. It is a contradiction that makes this moment in history so fascinating, a war too short for strategy, too fast for diplomacy, and too chaotic to fit neatly into any tradition of military conflict. And yet, despite its brevity, it carried consequences that reshaped an island kingdom. Before we drift deeper into the morning of August 27, 1896, imagine the island of Zanzibar awakening slowly under heavy, humid air. The harbour creaks with anchored ships, the palace rises pale and still against the light, hiding the tension inside its walls, and the British fleet waits offshore with a calmness that feels almost unsettling, considering what is about to happen. And let's be honest, a modern person wouldn't handle this setting very well. The heat alone is enough to flatten most people. By mid-morning the humidity wraps around the body like warm cloth, and the noise of the harbour, bells, gulls, steam whistles, would send half of us looking for the nearest quiet room within minutes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and tell me in the comments where you re-listening from and what time it is for you right now. It is always soothing to see this little community drifting through history together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Morning begins slowly on the island of Zanzibar, with a heat that rises even before the sun finishes climbing over the horizon. The air feels heavy, as if the humidity has gained its own weight overnight. Along the harbour, where wooden dhows rest beside the larger European steamships, the water lies still enough to reflect the pale colours of dawn. The surface shivers only when a small wave hits the stone quay, or when a passing gull dips low in search of scraps left by fishermen. The guard at the end of the pier wipes his forehead with a cloth that is already damp. The day has barely begun, yet the warmth presses gently against his skin, warning him that the afternoon will be far more demanding. He adjusts his belt, feeling the leather soft from constant exposure to salt air. Around him, the harbour stirs one sound at a time, the scrape of rope against wood, the groan of a mast shifting, the splash of an oar dipping into the water. Every sound arrives slowly, muffled by the thickness of the air. Zanzibar at this hour appears calm, almost serene. Boats rock lightly against their moorings. Merchants begin to open their small wooden stalls along the waterfront, lifting shutters with quiet creaks that echo against the stone. A few early fishermen haul baskets filled with the last of the night's catch. They step onto the quay with practiced movements, balancing their weight carefully so the baskets remain steady. The smell of fish, salt, and wet rope lingers in the air, spreading across the harbour like a reminder of the island's dependence on the sea. In the distance, a British steamship rests at anchor, its metal hull catching the first weak light. Thin trails of smoke rise from its funnel. The ship is quiet for the moment, but the presence of that vessel, and the others anchored nearby, gives the harbour a subtle tension. The locals have grown used to foreign ships, but this morning feels different, though few yet understand why. The palace stands across the water, its white walls beginning to glow as sunlight touches their surface. From afar it looks peaceful, as if it were simply another building preparing for the routine of the day. Yet anyone living in the city, the palace has been restless these last hours. The night ended with urgent messages, hurried footsteps, and whispers of uncertainty. Even without seeing the movement inside, one can sense that the building holds an uneasy quiet, the kind that arrives when something significant has happened and the consequences have not yet unfolded. A clerk walks along the harbour road carrying scrolls tucked under his arm. He keeps his pace steady, though sweat begins to form at his hairline. He glances once toward the anchored ships, then continues without hesitation. Government officials have been moving since before dawn. Their instructions are clear: Be available. Be prepared. A small market near the quay begins to assemble. Women arrange baskets of spices, turmeric, cloves, cinnamon, and pepper stacked in small pyramids. The colors are warm and rich, deep reds, bright yellows, earthy browns. They tie cloths around their heads to keep the heat from building too quickly. Some exchange brief greetings, though their voices remain low. The spices fill the air with their scent, mixing with the smell of fish and sea salt in a way that seems uniquely tied to the island. The guard at the pier notices a young boy carrying a jug of water. The boy moves carefully, aware that the dust from the nearby road rises easily and clings to anything damp. He stops to let the goats wander past before continuing toward a nearby home. Household routines go on as always, even on a day that will soon become infamous. A pair of soldiers walks along the harbour path, their uniforms damp at the collars. They keep their heads lifted, observing everything with calm interest. Their steps are slow, as no immediate urgency has touched their duties yet. But they, like the guard, feel a growing unease. Something is shifting, like the air just before a monsoon wind changes direction. Near one of the small jetties, a group of dock workers sits on crates eating an early meal. Their bowls contain simple rice and bits of fish. They eat slowly, talking among themselves in soft tones. A few glance occasionally toward the palace or the British ships anchored offshore. Rumours have been drifting along the waterfront since dawn, and while none know the exact truth, all sense that today will not remain peaceful. The guard shifts his attention toward a dhow approaching the quay. The sail flutters slightly, catching a light breeze. The boat glides forward with practiced grace. Two men on board adjust ropes and guide the vessel to the dock, where they tie it with a thick coil of rope. One steps onto the stone with a small bundle, nodding to the guard before walking toward the merchant quarter. Their routine feels normal, yet even they glance once toward the palace before disappearing into the morning haze. Zanzibar's political situation in 1896 rests on a delicate balance. The death of a sultan always brings uncertainty, but this time the uncertainty carries sharper edges. A successor has been chosen, or rather, has chosen himself, and the British do not approve. Most of the island feels this tension in the same way they feel a shift in the weather. No announcement has been made, but the atmosphere has changed. The guard watches the horizon, where the sun begins to strengthen. The sky shifts slowly from pale peach to soft gold. Heat rises from the water's surface in faint shimmering waves. He takes a slow breath, feeling the air thick and warm. It fills his lungs. He adjusts his uniform again, brushing away a small patch of dust. Across the harbour, closer to the palace, another guard stands on a terrace overlooking the sea. He steadies himself beside a wooden railing, watching small groups of servants move briskly through the courtyard. They carry messages, adjust banners, and prepare the palace gates. Their movements suggest preparation, though for what, most of them do not yet know. They have been told only to be ready. The palace guard glances toward the anchored British ships. Their flags hang still in the faint breeze. He senses the weight of their presence, silent for now, but undeniably present. It is unusual for so many foreign ships to remain so close, so still, and so observant at this early hour. As the morning grows brighter, the island's usual chatter emerges, the call of merchants, the bleating of goats, the quick rhythmic tapping of a carpenter shaping wood in a nearby shop. Life continues, at least on the surface, but beneath this, tension moves quietly through the city. People glance at the palace more often than usual. Bystanders pause longer than necessary when they pass British sailors walking along the docks. Even the fishermen cleaning their nets do so with a distracted look, listening for voices raised in authority. A change has begun, though the day still carries the illusion of calm. And for the moment, the heat, the humidity, and the slow rhythm of the harbour hide the truth. A war is about to begin. A war that will end almost as quickly as it starts. A war that will leave the island forever changed, all within 38 minutes. Dawn thickens over the city as word spreads quietly through official corridors. The Sultan is dead. The news moves not like a shout, but like a ripple, passing from servant to messenger, from guard to clerk, from clerk to minister. Doors open and close in quick succession inside the palace compound. Lanterns that were meant to be extinguished after sunrise remain lit, their flames flickering against walls painted in soft earth tones. Even the courtyard fountains seem quieter, as if the water itself is listening. The guard at the palace gate feels the shift before anyone tells him directly. Servants hurry past with their heads lowered and their steps too fast to appear calm. A man carrying a stack of documents nearly drops them when turning a corner. Another looks out through the gate toward the sea, checking if foreign ships have noticed anything unusual. Under normal circumstances, the passing of a sultan would be a moment filled with ceremony, but today the air feels different, as if something important has happened too quickly, without the proper preparation. Inside the palace, officials gather in a shaded room with wood-run screens. The air is warm and still, carrying faint scents of burning incense left from the night. The men stand in small clusters, whispering anxiously. One man rubs his forehead repeatedly with a cloth, leaving small streaks of dust behind. Another taps his fingers against a scroll tube, unable to stay still. Sultan Hamid bin Thuwaini had ruled under British favour, a fact well known throughout the city. He maintained a delicate balance between honouring local traditions and accommodating foreign influence. His sudden death during the night breaks that balance instantly. No one has yet had time to mourn properly. Political consequences have arrived far faster than grief can form. On the palace terrace, where early sunlight begins to brighten the stone floor, a group of guards stands rigid. Their hands rest uneasily on the hilts of their weapons. They exchange short glances, but speak little. Even the breeze that moves through the open corridors feels slow and uncertain, carrying warm air scented faintly with jasmine and the sea. The absence of an heir formally approved by the British creates an immediate problem. The island's political structure has long been entangled with foreign oversight, and the smooth transition of power requires agreement from multiple sides. But transitions rarely move smoothly on mornings when the air hangs thick and the palace walls echo with hurried footsteps. A small door near the garden opens suddenly. A court official steps out, wiping sweat from his brow. His robe clings slightly to his back from the humidity. He leans against a column for a moment, catching his breath. His expression reveals what many have already begun to suspect. Someone has moved more quickly than the palace anticipated. Across the city, whispers run through the streets. Merchants in the bazaar hear fragments of the news from a courier who rushes past without stopping. Dock workers hear it from a sailor, who heard it from a guard, who heard it from a servant. Each retelling shifts slightly, becoming sharper, heavier, gaining urgency as it spreads. One phrase remains consistent: the Sultan is gone. Near the palace stables, a groom brushes a horse with long, even strokes. His movements remain steady, but his eyes flick often toward the palace walls. Even those who have no direct role in politics feel the tension rising. The animals sense the unease as well. One of the horses snorts repeatedly, stamping a hoof if uncomfortable with the thick stillness in the air. Inside a shaded hallway, a group of palace scribes prepares preliminary documents that will be needed once a successor is confirmed. They work quickly, but not confidently. Ink dries unevenly on the parchment in the warm air. One scribe blows softly on the surface to prevent smudging. Another pauses, holding his stylus above the page, if the words he must write feel heavier than the tool in his hand. Zanzibar's political structure in 1896 required its sultan to be acceptable to British authorities, whose influence extended across the island through treaties and trade agreements. A ruler who ignored this expectation is immediate conflict. The scribes know this, the officials know this. The British certainly know this. The palace courtyard grows crowded as more guards take positions. Their sandals scuff lightly against the stone, creating small bursts of sound that vanish quickly into the humid air. Lanterns sway slightly in the faint breeze. The light catches on metal spearheads, making brief flashes of brightness across the courtyard. A group of servants carries out a cloth-draped stretcher from a small inner chamber. Their faces are drawn and solemn. They move quietly, careful not to attract unnecessary attention. A few palace workers bow their heads as the stretcher passes. Others glance only briefly before returning to their duties. The urgency of the political situation, little space for proper mourning. Near the gate, a messenger dismounts from a tired horse. He wipes sweat from his neck and holds a sealed letter in his hand. The seal bears the mark of a British official. The guard nods and opens the gate wider, allowing the messenger to pass. Dust clings to the messenger's boots as he hurries across the courtyard. Foreign representatives have already begun sending inquiries. The British consul demands information. The naval officers aboard the anchored ships wait for confirmation of events. Even before the palace can control the story, others seek to shape it. The guard watching all this senses that the day is accelerating. The morning sun climbs higher, warming the palace stones. The heat spreads across the courtyard slowly, but the situation moves much faster. Servants rush between rooms. Officials gather and disperse. Messengers arrive breathless. Every movement feels like part of a pattern, from too quickly to fully understand. The Sultan's body is carried to a private room for preparation. The door closes quietly behind the servants. For a brief moment, the corridor falls still, a moment suspended, fragile, waiting. Then the sound of hurried footsteps returns. News has reached the palace. Someone has already claimed the throne. Someone the British did not approve. The calm morning ends. The real tension begins. The palace has barely settled from the shock of the Sultan's death when a new disturbance ripples across its corridors. It arrives not as a quiet whisper this time, but as a clear, undeniable fact spoken in low, urgent tones by guards, servants, and officials alike. Khalid has taken the palace. The guard standing at the inner gate hears the words from a breathless messenger who enters without ceremony. The messenger points toward the main residence with a trembling hand, barely catching his breath. His voice cracks once before he steadies it enough to speak clearly. The message spreads instantly. Khalid bin Barghash, a cousin of the late Sultan, has seized the palace compound and declared himself ruler. That declaration, made without British approval, strikes the officials harder than the news of the Sultan's death. Inside the palace courtyard, movement accelerates. Guards shift positions, forming clusters near key entrances. Their sandals scrape across the warm stone as they take up new stances. Some are visibly tense, others seem conflicted. Khalid is familiar to many of them, charismatic, ambitious, and impatient. Few expected him to act this quickly. But he has acted, and now the island must respond. The palace interior feels different within minutes. Doors once open for morning routines are shut. Windows that usually allow sea breezes to circulate are closed. The sound of hurried steps echoes off the walls, amplified by the tension tightening through the building. Khalid has assembled supporters from the night hours, calling guards loyal to him, asserting his claim with a confidence that leaves little room for hesitation. Those who stand with him through the palace with determined steps, adjusting banners, taking defensive positions, and preparing the area around the throne room. At one corridor, two palace workers quietly attempt to carry away furniture to make space for new guards. Their hands tremble as they pass a group of armed men who now claim authority. Neither worker speaks, they simply bow their heads and move on. In the courtyard, several cannons that had been stored under canvas are dragged into position by soldiers loyal to Khalid. The wheels groan under the weight. Dust rises as each cannon is rolled across the stone surface. Men shout brief instructions to one another. Some adjust ropes. Others check the positions of crates filled with ammunition. There is a sense of urgency, but also uncertainty. Many know that these weapons, though impressive in appearance, are old and unreliable. Certain weapons in the Zanzibari arsenal were outdated or poorly maintained, making their effectiveness limited even when prepared properly. Near the palace arches, a tension grows between guards. Some look toward the palace gates, where they know British forces may appear. Others avoid eye contact, unsure whether to commit to the new claimant or remain neutral. The heat in the courtyard intensifies, not from the sun alone, but from the pressure of standing at the edge of a political rupture. Inside the residence, Khalid positions himself at the heart of the palace. Servants bustle around him, arranging cushions and banners with the crest of the ruling family. His expression is fierce, set with determination. He gives orders with quick, sharp gestures. Every action suggests he sees himself not as a challenger, but as the rightful ruler. A few advisors whisper caution to him. Their voices are low, but the guards standing near the entrance can hear enough to understand the meaning. The British will not accept this. They have never tolerated a change of leadership without their approval. The treaties are clear, and the representatives in the consulate even clearer. But Khalid does not pause. He dismisses concerns with a brief wave. His supporters reinforce the doors. Men gather rifles from storage. Workers move furniture to block hallways. The palace begins shifting from a residence into a fortress. A clerk rushes across the garden with a stack of papers pressed to his chest. He stops to speak with a senior official, who shakes his head slowly in disbelief. The clerk wipes sweat from his brow and adjusts the papers again before hurrying toward another part of the palace. Outside the palace walls, the city senses the shift almost instantly. Vendors in the nearby market look toward the palace more frequently. A man selling dates lowers his voice when discussing the situation with a customer. Children playing in the streets mimic soldiers, raising sticks as pretend rifles before being called inside by anxious parents. At the harbour, British sailors look toward the palace with growing focus. Officers aboard the anchored ships gather near the railings with telescopes, observing the sudden flurry of activity. Smoke rising from the palace courtyard indicates that work is being done quickly for simple routine. British naval commanders begin speaking in firm tones. Runners move between the ships and the consulate. The wind carries faint snippets of their voices, though not enough to form words. A British warship raises a new signal flag. The palace guard notices. The tension deepens. Closer to the palace entrance, a tall official with a polished cane speaks to a group of guards. His voice remains low, but his expression reveals urgency. He gestures toward the palace interior, then toward the sea where British ships remain anchored. The guards exchange uneasy looks. Some adjust their belts. Others shift their weights from one foot to the other. The official leaves them with a final warning. Be prepared. But prepared for what? No one can say precisely. The air feels thick, as though holding a storm that has not yet broken. The sound of footsteps grows louder as more of Khalid's supporters enter the palace gates. Their presence tightens the atmosphere. The palace, once a place dominated by ritual, hierarchy, and carefully timed ceremony, now feels precarious, as if one wrong move could tilt everything into chaos. At the far end of the courtyard, a group of musicians arrives unexpectedly, unaware of the crisis. They were scheduled to perform later in the day, but upon seeing the guarded faces and armed men, they freeze. One slowly lowers his instrument. A guard waves them away gently, but firmly, and the musicians retreat in confusion. The palace fountain continues to flow, its water falling with soft, steady rhythm. The calm sound contrasts sharply with the hurried shouts and shifting weapons around it. The guard standing next to the fountain watches droplets splash against the stone basin, feeling the odd tension of standing in a place both serene and unstable. By mid-morning, the palace is fully transformed. Khalid stands at the center of it all, surrounded by supporters, guarded by outdated cannons, and determined beyond hesitation. The British have been ignored. The palace has been claimed, a line has been crossed, and across the harbour, the British fleet prepares to respond. Ultimatum at dawn. The morning sun climbs higher over Zanzibar as the British consul, Basil Cave, drafts a message that carries the weight of a nation behind it. His office is not large, but the mood inside it takes on the sharpness of a command post. Papers lie arranged neatly. The ink on his writing desk glistens faintly. A clerk waits nearby, stylus in hand, ready to copy whatever must be recorded. A thin breeze from an open window does little to cool the room. The consul writes quickly, pausing only once to steady his hand. The words are simple, direct, and without flourish, the kind of language designed to leave no space for interpretation. Khalid must step down, leave the palace, and seek approval from the British government if he wishes to be considered for succession. If he does not comply, force will be used. The last phrase is underlined. Outside the consulate, the streets remain uneasy. Merchants continue arranging their morning goods, but their motions are slower than usual. The smell of spices remains strong, drifting through the air, yet conversations remain muted. The city knows that something decisive is being shaped behind closed doors. A British Marine stands at the consulate gate, his uniform already warm from the sun. He watches the harbour, where the anchored ships sit in a calm line, their metal hulls reflecting the brightening light. Steam rises from one of them in steady white coils. The sight is both familiar and unsettling. Familiar because these ships have been here before, unsettling because today their purpose is different. The consul seals the ultimatum with wax and hands it to a trusted messenger. The man nods once, sharp and controlled. He steps outside, mounts a horse waiting in the shade, and begins the ride toward the palace. His pace is firm, neither hurried nor slow, the pace of someone carrying a message that must be delivered precisely, but carefully. The horse's hooves strike the packed earth with soft thuds. Dust rises behind them in small clouds. As the messenger moves through the main road, people step aside. Some glance at the sealed letter in his hand and guess immediately what it contains. He reaches the palace gate where guards tense at his arrival. Their eyes flick quickly to the letter, then to the messenger's steady expression. One of them gestures for him to dismount. The gate opens with a heavy, reluctant creak. Inside, the courtyard is filled with men loyal to Khalid. They move with energy, but also unease, adjusting cannons, distributing rifles, arguing over spacing and positions. The messenger steps among them with practiced calm. The air smells of metal, gunpowder, and warm stone. A guard escorts him inside. Khalid receives the ultimatum in a high-ceilinged hall where banners hang motionless in the heavy air. Servants hover nearby, uncertain whether to stay or leave. Khalid breaks the wax seal with an impatient snap. His eyes move quickly across the page. He says nothing for a long, heavy moment. Behind him, a few supporters shift uneasily. They know the meaning of such a letter. They know that British warnings rarely come without consequence, and that this one, delivered at dawn, in writing, carries more weight than the usual political conversations held in shaded courtyards. Khalid lowers the letter slowly. He lifts his chin, sets his jaw, and speaks with a tone that leaves no room for debate. He will not step down. The air in the room seems to tighten. Outside, word spreads through the palace with speed. Guards straighten, supporters whisper, some servants rush to close heavy shutters. Others fetch water, anticipating a long day ahead. The messenger leaves as firmly as he arrived. He rides back toward the consulate with the reply everyone expected, but hoped might not come. Back at the consulate, the British officials absorb the news with restrained expressions. No raised voices, no outward surprise, only a tightening of posture, a firmer set to the jaw, a sharpening of purpose. The consul sends a signal to the harbour. Flags rise on the British ships, simple signals, practiced, unmistakable. Officers gather on the decks. Men move to their posts with calm efficiency. The metallic sound of chains, hatches, and rifles echoes across the water. Smoke thickens from funnels. Tension settles like a thin layer of dust across the harbour. On the palace ramparts, a guard notices the changes offshore. He lifts a hand to shade his eyes. The line of British ships looks the same at a distance, but their posture has changed. They are awake now, fully, unmistakably awake. By mid-morning, another courier arrives at the palace. This time he carries not a letter, but a spoken message. The British ultimatum has a deadline. 9 a.m. The words strike the courtyard like a dropped stone. Ripples spread. The men near the cannons work faster. The guards check their rifles again. One looks toward the palace gate, as if considering escape, but remains in place. Khalid stands at the balcony above the courtyard, watching his supporters. His expression remains fixed, unyielding. He believes he can hold. He believes his claim is justified. He believes the British will hesitate. He believes incorrectly. Across the harbour, the British fleet remains steady. Officers check their watches. Gun crews stand ready. Mariners secure lines. The ships face the palace with their hulls angled deliberately, their artillery already prepared. The city waits under increasing heat. A deadline now governs the morning. At 9 a.m., the ultimatum expires, and the shortest war in history will begin. Heat gathers quickly over Zanzibar as the morning leans toward its decisive hour. By the time the sun climbs past the rooftops and the harbour takes on its shimmering brightness, the island feels compressed beneath a layer of thick, unmoving air. The scent of the sea grows sharper, mixing with smoke from cooking fires, damp rope from the docks, and the faint metallic tang that always rises from weapons left too long under the sun. Every element of the morning presses inward, as if the entire island were preparing for a breath it has not yet taken. In the palace courtyard, the transformation that began earlier now reaches full intensity. Men loyal to Khalid move in hurried, tightening circles, carrying rifles that have not been cleaned properly, adjusting hats that slip under sweat, shouting instructions that mix with the clatter of equipment. The air vibrates with the scrape of dragged cannons, the slam of wooden chests filled with ammunition, and the thudding of boots on hot stone. Someone brings out a crate filled with old rifles, their barrels dull from years of handling without proper maintenance. A guard picks one up, checks the bolt, and frowns at the stiffness. Another man tries to oil a mechanism that refuses to move smoothly. The weapons are functional, but barely. The humidity has softened the rifle stocks, swelling the wood slightly, so that the metal parts fit unevenly. A few of the older palace guards speak quietly among themselves. They have seen weapons in this condition before, and know what such things mean. A war that depends on unreliable equipment cannot last long, but they keep these thoughts to themselves. Open doubt would draw attention at the worst possible time. Near the palace walls, cannon crews work to position their artillery. The cannons, dragged into place earlier in the morning, sit under strained ropes that prevent them from rolling backward on the uneven stone. Men push crates of powder closer, opening lids with careful hands. The powder smells sharp, carrying the faint scent of charcoal and sulfur. Cannons in Zanzibar at this time included pieces purchased decades earlier from various traders, and some had been left exposed to the coastal air long enough to corrode at the edges. One man taps the side of a cannon with his knuckles. The metal gives a hollow sound. He steps back instinctively, unsure whether the weapon will even fire when needed. Another man notices his hesitation, but says nothing. Eventually the first man returns to his work, tightening the ropes with forced determination. Inside the palace, Khalid moves through the corridors, assessing the readiness of his supporters. His expression remains firm even as he observes weapons that do not match the quality of those on the British ships offshore. His confidence has become its own type of armor, holding his composure together despite the growing awareness that his position is fragile. Servants follow him with fresh water poured into ceramic jugs. The air inside the halls feels trapped, warmed by bodies moving quickly in tight spaces. Lanterns flicker, even in daylight, as currents of hot air pass by. The guards near the doorways stand rigid, sweat slipping down their backs under their uniforms. Across the city, the British ships prepare with a very different rhythm. On the decks of the warships, men move with practiced precision. The lines are coiled neatly, the cannons shine from recent maintenance. Powder stores are sealed, ready, and protected against moisture. Officers watch the palace through telescopes, while calmly giving orders to their crews. Aboard the flagship, the tension is controlled. Sailors clean the deck one last time, not because it matters for battle, but because routine anchors their nerves. Artillery crews stand ready with their guns aimed directly at the palace. The warship's breech-loading naval guns sit in their armored housings with an air of quiet menace, vastly more powerful than the mismatched cannons on shore. A group of sailors load smaller weapons, rifles, pistols, and carbines, laying them out in ordered rows. A boatswain walks down the line, checking for damage or misalignment. His expression never changes. He has prepared for battle before, and although this situation is strange for its speed, it is still familiar in shape. The British Marines gather near the railings. They stand in the shade cast by the ship's awnings, adjusting belts, tightening straps, and securing equipment. One Marine checks the sight of his rifle, nodding at the smoothness of the motion. Another ties a bandana around his neck to protect against the heat. Their movements reveal discipline forged from years of training. Back on shore, the city watches. Fishermen pause in their work and look toward the harbor. Merchants selling spices stop mid-conversation. A woman carrying baskets of fruit sets them down carefully before stepping into the street to see if the rumors have grown into certainty. The flags raised on the British ships leave no room for doubt. The ultimatum is real. The threat is real. The deadline approaches. A group of palace supporters brings out a large drum and beats it once, calling additional men to gather. The drumbeat echoes through the courtyard, loud but unsteady. Some of the men who arrive carry spears instead of rifles, others have swords. The mix of weapons reflects the disorganized nature of the defense, a combination of old military stores, family heirlooms, and whatever could be found quickly. Not far from the palace, the local rifle corps, a small unit trained with British assistance, faces its own internal struggle. Some members lean toward supporting Khalid. Others feel loyalty to the British officers who trained them. A few simply want to avoid being caught in the middle. They stand in scattered groups, speaking in low tones, trying to judge which decision will leave them standing when the day ends. A group of palace workers carries large buckets of water from a nearby well, splashing the stone floors to keep dust from building. The moisture evaporates almost instantly under the growing heat. A boy assigned to refill these buckets runs back and forth, sweat dripping from his forehead as the sun climbs. Near the palace gate, a man checks the tension in a set of ropes attached to a hastily constructed barricade. The ropes creak. The barricade shifts slightly. He pulls again, then ties a knot. The knot holds, for now. The guard stationed near the central staircase wipes sweat from his brow. The humidity is intense, wrapping around the body like a damp cloth. Even standing still feels exhausting. He shifts his weight from one foot to the other, trying to relieve the growing ache in his legs. Everywhere inside the palace, the same mixture of heat, urgency, and fear fills the air. The British, however, face no such confusion. Their guns remain trained, their officers remain steady. Their deadline remains fixed. As the hour approaches 9, tension gathers like humidity before a storm. The palace seems to shrink under the weight of expectation. Even the sound of the fountain feels sharper, echoing in a way that draws too much attention. A final message from the British reaches the palace. The deadline stands. Khalid gives no reply. He does not intend to step down. On the British flagship, an officer looks at his pocket watch. 8:57. Heat presses down. 8:58. The palace courtyard grows unnaturally quiet. 8:59. Shadows tighten beneath the cannons on the British ships. 9 o'clock. The ultimatum expires. Two armies, one organized, one desperate, face each other across the harbor. The shortest war in history is seconds away from beginning. The moment the clock strikes 9, the entire island seems to pause. It is not a dramatic pause, not the silence of a storm breaking, but a heavy, breathless stillness that settles across the palace, the harbour, and the narrow streets of Zanzibar. Every sound feels suspended in warm, humid air. Even the gulls circling above seem quieter, their calls softened as if muffled by anticipation. In the palace courtyard, the men closest to the cannons stand rigid, staring toward the harbour. Their hands grip ropes, levers, and barrels that have not yet been tested in true battle. Sweat beads on their faces, a few swallow hard. The heat presses against their backs, but none move to wipe away the moisture. Movement feels too risky, as if even shifting weight might disturb the fragile balance of this moment. Khalid stands on a shaded balcony above them, staring out across the water. He holds himself tall, shoulders square, expression rigid. Servants hover several steps behind him, unsure whether to speak or retreat. They remain silent. Everyone remains silent. The palace itself feels like it has stopped breathing. Beyond the walls, the city's residents gather cautiously along rooftops, balconies, and narrow alleyways. Fishermen pause with nets draped over their shoulders. Merchants hold their breath behind half-open shutters. Children tug at their mothers' sleeves, whispering questions that go unanswered. A donkey stands tethered to a post near the spice market, tail flicking lazily, unaware of the tension surrounding it. Across the harbour, the British ships maintain perfect stillness. The crews stand at their stations, rifles slung, artillery prepared. Officers hold watch through telescopes, their faces expressionless. The ship's hulls reflect bright sunlight, creating sharp lines on the water surface. The Union Jack hangs unmoving in the faint air. The British flagship fires no warning shot at 9 o'clock. It does nothing at all. It simply waits. 1 minute passes, then another. The stillness deepens. Inside a small shop near the docks, a man sharpening a knife pauses mid-stroke. The knife remains pressed against the whetstone, water dripping slowly from its blade. He looks toward the harbour through the open doorway, hardly blinking. A group of sailors from foreign merchant ships stand on the decks, arms folded, watching. Their expressions range from nervous amusement to quiet concern. They know something is about to happen, something unusually quick, unusually decisive. The palace cannons remain pointed outward. Sweat runs down the arm of a gunner, who tries to hide the tremble in his fingers. Another man loads powder into a cannon's breech. He coughs when the dust rises, then forces himself to straighten. The air thickens as the minutes stretch. At 9:02 a.m., a British officer raises a flag on the flagship, indicating readiness. The movement is smooth, practiced. The flag rises without hesitation, catching sunlight as it lifts into place. A murmur spreads along the palace ramparts, just enough sound to break the stillness for a moment. Men shift slightly. Someone mutters a short prayer. Another checks the fuse on a cannon again, even though he knows it will not improve its condition. Khalid remains still. In the city, a woman carrying a basket of fruit sets it down gently. She steps closer to the edge of her balcony, hands gripping the railing. Her breath catches in the warm air. She has never seen a war begin, let alone one with such extraordinary speed. Zanzibar's harbour, usually filled with the creaking of boats and the hum of trade, now holds a silence so deep that the slap of a small wave against a wooden hull sounds startlingly loud. The British ships do not move. At 9:04, a boy sitting on a rooftop whispers to his brother, asking why nothing is happening. His brother does not answer. Their mother pulls them both closer, covering their shoulders with a thin cloth to protect them from the rising sun. At 9:05, a palace guard adjusts his stance, trying to relieve the ache forming in his legs. He shifts his weight slightly and winces when a pebble digs into his heel. The moment feels absurdly normal for such an extraordinary morning. Across the harbour, the British crews wait with unwavering discipline. A few more minutes pass. A goat wanders into the palace courtyard, sniffing at a pile of rope beside a cannon. It nudges the coil with its nose, uninterested in the tension around it. A guard gently shoos it away. The goat trots off stubbornly, offended at the interruption. The atmosphere begins to feel unnatural. Time stretches. Waiting replaces breathing. People cannot tell whether this pause is the last moment before an explosion or the beginning of something else. Diplomacy, negotiation, retreat. No one knows. Even the British officers, so calm and rigid, feel a subtle tightening in the air, as if the morning itself is hesitating. The city holds its breath. At 9:09, a whisper passes along the palace corridor. A final message from a British representative has arrived. The message is brief, delivered with practiced calm. Khalid's refusal is confirmed. The guard closest to the courtyard gate hears the messenger's words and feels the breath leave his chest in a slow, uneven exhale. There is no more doubt. There is no more time. The British ships adjust their positions slightly. A signal flag shifts. The air feels even heavier. Zanzibar stands between one breath and the next, waiting for history to break open. The shortest war ever recorded will begin at any moment. The final minute before war, the air grows impossibly thick as the minute approaches when waiting will no longer matter. The sun has risen fully, now sharpening every line of the harbour. The white palace walls, the dark hulls of British warships, the pale stone of the quay, the distant ripples on the water that reflect light so brightly they almost hurt the eyes. Heat radiates from every surface. Shadows shrink. Even the wind seems hesitant, brushing the city with warm, shallow breaths. Inside the palace courtyard, the defenders stand in tense formation. Their clothing clings to their backs. Their rifles feel heavy. Their cannons creak slightly under the strain of tightened ropes. Men wipe their palms on their trousers, unwilling to admit their nerves, though their hands shake just enough to betray them. One man near the palace gate adjusts the strap of his weapon for the third time in a minute. The leather pinches his shoulder, but he can't stop fussing with it. Another defender mutters to himself, rehearsing motions drilled into him years earlier. Load, aim, brace, steady. The routine steadies him, even as the morning grows heavier with dread. High above, Khalid stands on the balcony again. The light catches the fabric of his robe, making it glow faintly against the dark interior behind him. He keeps his chin lifted. Inside his chest, 100 emotions compete, but his expression remains fixed, stern and determined. He watches the British ships as if they might withdraw simply by facing him. But the British ships do not withdraw. Aboard the flagship, officers stand in crisp, controlled stillness. Their boots shine. Their uniforms remain dry despite the humidity. They watch the palace with telescopes, checking angles and distances. The gunners adjust their artillery with small, precise movements, the kind learned not through panic, but through routine. A midshipman glances at the chronometer built into the cabin wall. His throat tightens. He has never seen a war begin. Certainly not one with a countdown. On the deck below, Marines breathe in steady rhythm. A few silently rehearse commands. One secures a belt of ammunition more tightly. Another scratches the back of his hand absent-mindedly. None speak louder than a whisper. The stillness feels sacred, as if breaking it prematurely would summon fate too soon. At 9:13 a.m., a ripple of movement spreads through the British ships. Sailors stand straighter. Officers lean forward. Gunners position themselves. A blue signal flag rises, quick, efficient, practiced. In the palace courtyard, men shift uneasily. Someone whispers a question. Another responds with a shrug. A few take tiny steps backward, thinking no one will notice. Others tighten their grips on rifles. The smell of gunpowder from the open crates stings the air. The animals in the area react before the people. A horse tied near the gate tosses its head, hooves scraping against stone. A goat bleats sharply before darting behind a pile of crates. A rooster in a nearby courtyard crows unexpectedly. Its voice too loud, too sudden. At 9:14 a.m., the British begin a final sequence of preparations. Aboard the flagship, the captain gives a quiet order. It travels down the deck like a controlled current. Nothing explosive, nothing loud, but clear enough that every trained man hears it. Cannons lock into aim. Hatches lower, gunners brace, Marines lift rifles. In a nearby alley, a group of civilians huddles together, watching from behind woven baskets stacked to form a makeshift shield. Their breaths come quickly despite their efforts to remain quiet. A mother pulls her youngest child close to her chest. The child squeezes her arm and hides his face. Inside the palace, Khalid receives one last whispered question from an advisor. Is there still time to negotiate? Khalid does not answer. His silence is an answer. At 9:14 and 50 seconds, a strange sensation spreads across the harbor. Not a sound, not a visible movement, but a shift in pressure, as if the air has tightened. People feel it in their chests. Animals feel it more strongly. Even the water seems stiller than before. On the flagship, the captain glances once more at his watch. 9:15. He nods. The signal flag drops. A shout travels across the deck, crisp, practiced, unmistakable. In the palace courtyard, a defender looks up sharply at the sound of distant metal shifting on the British ships. He opens his mouth to speak, to warn, to call out, but he never finished the sentence. Because in the next heartbeat, the war begins. The war begins not with a gradual build of noise, not with a confused exchange of fire, but with a single, unmistakable sound, the deep, concussive boom of a naval gun fired at close range. It rolls across the harbor like a collapsing wall of air, shaking window shutters and stirring dust from rooftops. For a fraction of a second, people stand frozen, in the palace courtyard, on the docks, along the narrow alleys, as if the sound alone has struck them. Then the shockwave arrives. It hits the palace walls with a force that feels physical, sending loose stones clattering to the ground. Birds explode into the sky in a frantic burst. A row of flags along the harbor jerks violently, snapping in the sudden surge of wind created by the blast. From the balcony, Khalid grips the railing instinctively. The air vibrates around him. The balcony's carved woodwork trembles under the pressure. He stares toward the harbor, eyes wide, seeing the flash of the cannon a moment too late to brace. A second blast follows almost immediately, the British ships fire in coordinated succession. Artillery crews working with mechanical precision. Smoke billows from the guns, drifting upward in thick, grey clouds that obscure parts of the ship before the sea breeze slowly carries them away. The flashes of light reflect off the water, turning the harbour surface into a trembling sheet of white and gold. In the palace courtyard, the defenders react with a mixture of shock and instinct. The first shell strikes the palace wall, sending a spray of stone fragments across the courtyard. Men duck, shout, scramble for cover. The sound rings in their ears, leaving a dull hum behind. One cannon crew attempts to respond, but their gun misfires immediately, producing nothing more than a sharp metallic click and the thin puff of smoke that drifts upward without force. The gunner frowns, tries again, and succeeds only in coaxing a small hiss from the powder. Another shell crashed through the palace roof, sending tiles flying in every direction. Dust pours into the air, thick enough to sting the eyes. A decorative wooden beam splinters, crashing to the floor below with a heavy thud. Across the city, people duck instinctively. Merchants dive behind their stalls, covering their heads with their arms. A fisherman throws himself flat on the ground beside his nets. A group of children run toward an alley, guided by their parents' urgent shouts. The British crews continue firing in tight intervals. Their training shows in every motion, loading, bracing, adjusting aim. The thunder of artillery repeats again and again, turning the morning into a series of calculated strikes. One shell tears through a balcony pillar, sending part of the structure crashing into the courtyard. Men scatter as debris falls around them. A guard coughs, choking on dust and smoke, trying to shield his eyes from the stinging powder drifting through the air. The palace cannons attempt a second attempt to respond. Only one manages to fire. The shot arcs toward the harbor, but falls short, hitting the water with a splash that sends droplets flying harmlessly into the air. The distance is wrong, the angle is wrong. The cannon recoil throws the crew backward. Another palace cannon erupts prematurely, its barrel cracking under the strain. A burst of flame shoots sideways, forcing nearby defenders to leap away. The smell of burning wood and scorched metal fills the air. Inside the palace halls, servants rush in confusion. Shutters bang open and closed from the force of the blasts. A decorative vase falls from a shelf and shatters across the floor. Footsteps echo chaotically, to many moving in too little space. The corridors fill with smoke from burning curtains and splintered wood. Khalid grips the balcony rail harder as another shot hits the palace gardens, scattering soil and uprooting shrubs. His supporters shout from below, urging him to take shelter. But he remains for a few seconds longer, stunned, not by fear, but by the sheer speed with which control is slipping away from him. In the harbor, smoke drifts in slow, shifting waves around the British ships. The men on deck work steadily, reloading the big guns with smooth, synchronized motions. Officers call out ranges and angles in crisp voices. A midshipman wipes sweat from his brow, even though a breeze reaches the deck more easily than anywhere in the city. Another volley hits the palace facade. Wooden shutters explode into fragments. A balcony edge collapses. The courtyard floods with dust so thick it becomes difficult to see more than a few paces ahead. Men cough violently, covering their faces with cloth. At the far end of the courtyard, a defender tries to rally others, shouting instructions as loudly as he can. But his voice is swallowed by the thunder of the next shell. Stone chips fly past him, striking the ground like sharp, angry rain. Near the palace gate, a guard ducks behind a pillar that rattles under the blast. He presses himself against the stone and feels it shake again with the force of another impact. The air grows hotter. Smoke gathers in layers, making it difficult to breathe. A goat races through the courtyard in panic before disappearing behind a pile of crates, bleating desperately. A nearby cannon crew abandons their post, shielding their faces from the falling debris. One of them limps, having been struck in the leg by a piece of shattered stone. Khalid finally retreats into the interior hall as another volley aims higher, targeting the upper part of the palace where he had been standing moments earlier. The war has been underway for only seconds, but the destruction is already severe. The palace, built to impress, not withstand naval bombardment, cracks open under the repeated strikes. Outside, the British ships prepare their next coordinated volley. Inside, the defenders brace themselves as best they can. Zanzibar's shortest war has begun with overwhelming force. The next half hour will decide everything. The palace, only moments ago a place of tense stillness, now becomes a landscape of confusion shaped by smoke, splintered stone, and voices raised in panic. The thunder of naval artillery repeats again and again, each blast sending vibrations through the ground, if the palace itself were groaning under the strain. Dust fills the air in thick waves, making it difficult to see more than a few steps ahead. Every breath carries the taste of stone, powder, and burning wood. In the courtyard, defenders scatter as another shell tears through the outer wall. The impact sprays fragments like jagged hail. A man near the gate throws himself behind a wooden cart, gripping the edge so hard his knuckles turn white. Another stumbles over a fallen beam, struggling to regain balance as smoke swirls around him. Their rifles feel to light, their courage to thin. They try to shout to each other, but the crashing of artillery drowns out most words. A cannon crew near the eastern side attempts once again to return fire. They push the heavy cannon into alignment, load the powder, and brace themselves. The fuse sparks, but the shot fires weakly, the cannonball rolling out with no real force before dropping into the courtyard with a dull clunk. The crew exchanges stunned looks. The weapon they prepared so desperately, is little more than a heavy ornament. Nearby, another cannon stands unused. Its barrel is cracked from the earlier misfire, and the men assigned to it have already abandoned the position after a splinter of metal flew past one of their faces. They now crouch behind a stack of crates, waiting for instructions that will never come. Inside the palace halls, chaos spreads through narrow corridors. Servants run in frantic bursts, carrying children, sacred objects, or simply whatever they manage to grab. The sound of collapsing wood echoes down the passageways as door frames give way under the vibration of repeated blasts. Lanterns swing violently, spilling hot oil onto the floor. A curtain catches fire, sending a column of black smoke into the hall. A clerk tries to gather important documents, only to drop half of them when another explosion shakes the room. Papers scatter across the floor. He kneels, reaches to save them, then stops. A ceiling tile crashes down inches from his hand. He abandons the task and runs. A group of defenders rushes up the main staircase to reinforce the upper level, but a shell strikes the roof above them. The staircase fills with debris, forcing them to retreat. Dust pours down like dirty snow. The air grows hotter, thicker, more suffocating with every minute. Outside the palace, the city reacts in trembling waves. People crouch behind doorways. Some flee down alleys. Others freeze, unsure which direction offers safety. The harbour area becomes a shelter of sorts. Sailors from merchant ships pull civilians aboard, while others signal from docks for people to take cover behind crates and mooring posts. On the British warships, the crews work with relentless precision. The guns fire in measured, rotating intervals. Recoil pushes the barrels back sharply before they are reset. Smoke billows across the decks, but the men continue their tasks with steady hands. The officers watch the palace through dust and haze, adjusting orders only when necessary. Aboard one ship, a young marine flinches at each volley, though he tries to hide it. A senior officer places a calm hand on his shoulder for a moment before moving on. Fear is allowed, hesitation is not. Back at the palace, a volley of smaller shells strikes the garden. Soil erupts, sending clumps of earth flying. A palm tree splinters. Broken fronds scatter across the courtyard, mixing with stone fragments and fallen banners. The palace fountain continues to run for a few minutes longer, its water splashing calmly even as chaos grows around it. Eventually, a nearby explosion cracks its base, and the flow weakens, turning into a slow trickle that seeps into the dust. Near the western entrance, a defender tries to fire his rifle, but the humidity has dampened the powder. The weapon fizzles. He swears under his breath and retreats behind a column. Another man next to him holds a spear, not out of tradition, but because there were not enough functioning rifles to equip everyone. A section of the roof collapses fully, sending tiles crashing into the main hall. Shouts echo through the smoke-choked space. Some defenders attempt to move rubble to free trapped men, but another blast forces them back. The walls tremble under each targeted strike, fine cracks spidering across plaster that once displayed intricate designs. Khalid moves from the balcony to an inner chamber, shields held above him by two supporters. His robes are dust-covered now, and his face shows a shift, still determined, but strained. He demands reports, asks about casualties, checks the status of the cannons. The answers bring little comfort. His forces cannot match the firepower aimed at his palace. He paces with quick, tight steps as the walls around him shake again. Outside, one of the palace's larger cannons fires at last with an unexpectedly strong blast. The shot arcs toward the harbour, but misses entirely, splashing into the water far from the British ships. The gun crew cheers instinctively, even though the shot achieved nothing. In desperate moments, sound becomes victory. But the British reply in seconds. A direct hit strikes the palace courtyard. Two defenders throw themselves to the ground. Dust plumes rise in thick waves. The air feels hotter now, as if fire hides just beneath the smoke. Near the palace gate, A group of men tries to lift a fallen beam to rescue someone trapped beneath it. They strain, groaning under the weight. Another blast hits the outer wall, and they abandon the rescue to protect themselves, forced to choose survival over bravery. On the docks, people watch helplessly. Some pray, some hide their faces. Others stare at the palace in stunned disbelief, knowing the structure they grew up seeing, the symbol of authority on the island, is being destroyed faster than anyone imagined possible. Minutes pass in chaotic rhythm. Explosions, shouts, smoke, collapsing stone. The war feels relentless, but the clock tells another story. Only a short stretch of time has passed since the first shot. The palace, however, already looks transformed, cracked, burning, fragmented, struggling to hold its own shape. As the bombardment continues, defenders begin to fall back deeper inside. Their positions crumble, their nerves fray. The heat feels suffocating. The smell of burning wood mixes with the sharp scent of gunpowder, filling the lungs with every breath. This is no battle of equal sides. This is endurance measured in minutes. The chaos continues, but the end is approaching. The thunder of the bombardment begins to change. It is still loud, still forceful, still shaking the air with every strike. But something in the rhythm shifts. The British guns slow, firing in measured intervals instead of relentless volleys. Smoke drifts in thicker layers now, clinging to the palace walls and hanging low over the shattered courtyard. The defenders inside move like shadows through dust, coughing, stumbling, trying to make sense of the destruction around them. The palace is no longer a clear structure. Parts of the outer wall have collapsed entirely. Sections of the roof lie scattered across the courtyard in jagged fragments. A corner tower leans at a strange angle, as though deciding whether to fall fully. Fires burn in several rooms, small but persistent, licking at wooden beams and sending additional smoke into the corridors. Inside, the defenders retreat farther into what remains of the palace interior. Their movements are slower now, not out of caution, but exhaustion. Their rifles feel heavier, their steps feel unsteady. The thick smoke makes every breath sting. Some lean against walls to catch a moment of relief, wiping soot from their eyes. Others kneel beside wounded comrades, whispering reassurances that feel too thin to matter. Near the central hall, a group of men tries one final time to fire a cannon, pushing it into alignment despite its cracked barrel. They load the powder with trembling hands. The fuse sparks, then sputters out. A second attempt results in the same failure. The men exchange a defeated glance before backing away as another British shell hits nearby, shaking the ground beneath them. Khalid retreats into a deeper chamber, surrounded by a shrinking circle of supporters. His face is streaked with dust, his robe is torn at the shoulder. He asks for reports, but the answers are all the same. The cannons have failed, the courtyard is collapsing, defenders are running out of ammunition, and the palace cannot withstand another full volley. Each response seems to dim something inside him, though his posture remains rigid. A sudden tremor runs through the building as a shell strikes the western facade, sending debris raining into the hall. The noise is deafening. A man shielding Khalid stumbles, nearly dropping the shield he holds above them. Khalid steadies him, then looks toward the entrance. His supporters watch him with wide, anxious eyes. They do not speak, but their silence asks everything. What now? Across the harbour, the British ships remain steady. Sailors continue their routines. Officers lower telescopes long enough to issue new commands. The guns prepare for another volley. The war has lasted minutes, but the precision of the British fleet means they could continue far longer without strain. In the city below, civilians watch from every rooftop, every alley, frozen in disbelief. They have never seen this kind of destruction. They whisper prayers, they call out for relatives. They keep children close. The sun climbs higher, expanding the heat until it sits on the skin like a burning cloth. Inside the palace, the defenders' resolve begins to waver visibly. A man crouched behind a fallen beam of the shattered courtyard, and whispers that they must flee. Another nods, pressing a cloth against a bleeding arm. A third stares toward the exit, trying to decide whether running would condemn him or save him. Near the palace entrance, a young defender coughs violently from the smoke. When he looks up, he sees a flag lying crumpled on the ground, white cloth, once used as a ceremonial banner. It's half buried under debris. He hesitates, glancing around. No one has told him what to do next. Orders have stopped coming. The palace feels leaderless under the weight of its own ruin. He crawls toward the cloth, pulling it free. The fabric is dirty, torn at one corner. It looks too fragile to matter. Yet in this moment, it is the only symbol left that can change anything. He stands slowly, gripping the cloth with both hands, coughing as smoke pours around him. His knees shake, his chest burns. But he steps into the courtyard anyway, waving the cloth weakly at first, then higher, raising it above the dust as best he can. Another defender sees him and shouts for help. Two others run forward, lifting the young man when his legs buckle. Together they carry him toward the palace gate, the white cloth held high. The firing from the British ship slows again, as if noticing movement. On the flagship, an officer lifts a telescope. He sees the cloth fluttering weakly in the smoky air. He lowers the telescope and nods to the captain. The captain raises his hand. A signal flag changes on the mast. The guns fall silent. The sudden quiet is overwhelming. After so many blasts, the absence of noise feels like a different kind of impact. Dust settles slowly in the courtyard. The crackling of small fires replaces the thunder of artillery. Men inside the palace stare at one another, uncertain whether the silence is real or only a pause. Khalid hears the change too. It feels like a weight dropping from the air. He turns toward the courtyard, unable to hide the shock that crosses his face. His supporters look toward him, waiting for direction that will no longer come. The palace gate opens. A cluster of defenders steps outside, carrying the white cloth. Their faces are streaked with soot and sweat. Their clothes are torn. They move slowly, cautiously. They know the war is not over until the British accept their signal. Along the harbour, civilians creep forward again, unsure whether it is safe, but drawn by the quiet. They watch as the defenders move toward the water's edge. Aboard the British flagship, the captain gives the command to cease fire. The ships remain in position, but lower their artillery slightly. Marines stand ready but relaxed. Officers continue scanning for any sign of deception, though none appears. The defenders reach the quay, climbing onto a platform overlooking the harbour. They raise the white cloth high so that it catches the sun, bright even through the tint of smoke. The war, the shortest in history, is over. Barely half an hour has passed since the first shot. The British ships remain silent. The palace stands in smoking ruins. And Zanzibar breathes again, shaken and forever changed. The silence that follows the bombardment settles over the palace in a way that feels almost unreal. Smoke drifts upward in lazy columns now, no longer pushed aside by the force of explosions. The air is heavy, warm and still, so still that every small sound becomes strangely amplified. The crackle of burning wood, the quiet sob of a wounded man, the distant creaking of a shattered beam giving way inch by inch. The palace courtyard, once an organized space of ceremony and movement, has become an uneven field of debris. Broken stone lies in jagged chunks, fallen tiles crunch underfoot. Pieces of carved wood, once part of ornate balconies, lie in splintered heaps. The fountain at the center now produces only a weak trickle of water, the basin cracked and leaking. Defenders move slowly through the wreckage, some limping, some helping others. Their faces are streaked with soot. Their clothing hangs in torn, dusty folds. A few sit where they are, too exhausted or stunned to stand. The smoke irritates their eyes, leaving them red and wet. The heat clings to their skin. But the sound of the guns has stopped, and that alone gives everyone a fragile, temporary relief. Near the palace gate, Several men lower the white cloth they carried. Their hands shake from exhaustion. One of them collapses to his knees, coughing uncontrollably. Another helps him sit back against a fallen beam. The quiet makes their breathing loud in the charged air. Inside the palace, the destruction feels heavier, more intimate. Rooms once cooled by carved screens now sit exposed to sunlight pouring through holes in the roof. Dust hangs in thick layers over everything: furniture, rugs, mosaic floors. A cabinet lies overturned, its contents scattered in a chaotic spill of papers, ink pots, and ceremonial objects. A cracked mirror reflects only fragments of the hall. A narrow corridor, partially collapsed, leads deeper into the palace. Two men pick their way through the rubble, searching for survivors. They move stones aside carefully, listening for any voice. Occasionally they call out, but answers are faint or non-existent. One man pauses to lean against a wall, tears streaking through the soot on his cheeks. He wipes them away quickly before continuing. In a damaged chamber, a group of wounded defenders lies on makeshift bedding, torn cloths laid across the floor. A few men attempt to treat them with bandages ripped from their own clothes. They work silently, focused entirely on the immediate task. The smell of blood mixes with the powder smoke, creating a sharp, metallic scent that clings to the room. A servant carrying a small pot of water moves cautiously among the injured. The pot is nearly empty, and the water inside is warm, but he offers it anyway. Each wounded man takes a sip, nods weakly, and passes it on. Farther inside, an official tries to gather important objects from the rubble. He moves through a room where ceremonial robes hang torn, and dust covered from fallen beams. A chest carved with floral patterns lies cracked open, revealing scrolls inside that are now coated in grey ash. He kneels, picking them up one by one, shaking dust from their edges, checking which ones can be saved. But the list of things that can be saved is short. The palace was not built for war. Its beauty has become its weakness. The walls that once impressed visitors crumble easily under naval bombardment. The high ceilings that allowed cool air to circulate now act as funnels for falling debris. The ornate wooden screens, carved with incredible craftsmanship, burn quickly when struck with sparks. Outside, civilians begin to approach cautiously. They step over rubble at the palace entrance, whispering in low voices. A woman covers her mouth with her scarf to block the smoke as she peers into the courtyard. A boy clings to her side, staring wide-eyed at the destruction. These people have seen fires before, storms before, even political unrest before, but nothing like this. A group of older men gathers near the gate. They speak quietly with one another, shaking their heads. They have lived through many changes of leadership, but never one so abrupt, so violent, so short. One man leans heavily on his staff, his eyes fixed on the palace walls, as if trying to reconcile the memory of what the building once was with the ruin before him. In the upper rooms, the last remaining defenders pull back from the shattered windows as they assess the damage. They know the British Marines may soon arrive to secure the area. The palace no longer offers any protection. Its defenses have collapsed, its cannons rendered useless, its leadership displaced. Khalid retreats through a corridor where the ceiling has partially collapsed. His steps are brisk, though the exhaustion in his body is clear. Dust covers his clothing, and his hair clings to his forehead. Two of his supporters walk beside him, shielding him as they guide him through the debris. He says nothing now. His focus is entirely on escape. He knows the British will not allow him to remain here. He passes rooms where dust hangs like drifting fog. A decorated arch lies split down the center. A tapestry embroidered with metallic thread is coated so thickly in soot as its colors are barely visible. The palace that once symbolized his claim now stands as a fragile shell. The defenders in the courtyard do not notice him slip deeper into the interior. They are too focused on helping the injured or catching their breath. The war may have lasted only minutes, but its impact has left them disoriented, drained, and overwhelmed. Outside the palace, The British ships remain anchored, motionless now, their guns pointed downward. Boats begin to lower into the water, crews preparing to approach the palace under cautious but peaceful intent. The war is over, but the consequences are just beginning. Khalid's escape. Smoke still drifts through the broken palace corridors. When Khalid reaches the far side of the inner compound, his steps quick but uneven. The destruction behind him crackles and settles with the small, constant sounds of collapse, stones shifting, scorched beams bending, bits of plaster falling like soft rain. Each of those sounds follows him, a reminder of what he has lost. Two of his supporters stay close, guiding him around fallen door frames and over-shattered floor tiles. Their clothing is as torn and dust-covered as his, their faces streaked with sweat and ash. One of them winces as he walks, favoring a leg scraped raw by flying debris. But he stays beside Khalid without complaint. The other carries a small satchel clutched tightly against his chest, perhaps containing documents, perhaps valuables, or perhaps nothing at all. In moments like this, people hold whatever they believe might still matter. The passage narrows where part of the roof has collapsed, forcing them to duck under a charred beam. The wood above is still warm, blackened and fragile. Khalid hesitates only long enough to check its stability before moving through. On the other side, the courtyard wall looms ahead, cracked but still standing. A guard emerges from the shadows, startled to see them. He lowers his spear awkwardly, the shaft trembles in his hand. His eyes dart from Khalid to the ruined palace behind them. For a moment, he seems unsure whether to salute or flee. Khalid gives him a small nod, almost mechanical, and continues past him. The guard watches him go, chewing nervously on the inside of his cheek. The outer gate of this side passage stands half open, its hinges bent from the shockwave of earlier blasts. Smoke curls around it like a fading veil. Khalid's supporters push it wider, grunting under the weight. Outside, the alleyway is quieter than the interior courtyard, but the air is no clearer. Dust hangs in thick curtains, disturbed by each step they take. The heat feels even heavier now, as if the smoke has trapped it close to the skin. They move down the narrow path, passing walls cracked like dried clay. A broken lantern lies shattered on the ground, its flame long extinguished. Farther on, a toppled palm tree blocks part of the alley. They maneuver around it carefully, slipping through a gap between the branches and a side door. The city around the palace remains tense. Most civilians keep their distance, watching from shadowed archways or behind half-closed shutters. Word has spread that the British bombardment has ceased, but no one knows what happens next. People recognize Khalid as he passes, not openly, not boldly, but with small flickers of the eyes, quick inhales, or shuffled steps aside. Some look stunned, others frightened, a few angry, none intervene. At the end of the alley, a small courtyard opens before them with a well and a fig tree whose branches droop under the weight of dust. A man waits there, holding the reins of a horse. He steps forward as Khalid approaches, bowing his head quickly. The horse shifts nervously, hooves scraping the dry ground. Its ears flick at the distant crackle of fire from the palace ruins. The man hands the reins to one of Khalid's supporters. He looks at the former claimant only once, long enough to see the exhaustion in his eyes, then steps back into the shadow of the doorway, not wanting to be seen too clearly. Khalid hesitates for a moment beside the horse. He places one hand on its neck, steadying himself. The animal shivers slightly under his touch, whether from nerves or the heat. It's impossible to tell. His supporters glance at the alley behind them, urging him silently to hurry. A faint rumble of voices carries from the direction of the palace. British Marines must be approaching the grounds now, securing the area, searching for any remaining resistance. Time is short. Khalid mounts the horse with a sharp inhale, the movement costing him more energy than he expected. His robe catches briefly on the saddle's worn leather, but he frees it quickly. The supporters take positions on either side, ready to move with him. Dust rises as the horse shifts beneath him. They exit the courtyard, moving deeper into the maze of alleys that thread behind the palace district. The sounds of the city return slowly. Low murmurs from doorways, the faint clatter of a dropped bowl, the rustle of clothing brushed aside in haste. No one steps into their path, but every eye that watches seems to read the same truth. The man riding through the shadows is fleeing something that has already ended. As they pass a narrow stairway, a child peeks through the railing, gripping it tightly with both hands. His mother pulls him back into the house with a quick gesture. The door closes softly behind them. The path turns sharply, revealing a stretch of street that leads toward the grounds of the German consulate. The walls here are whitewashed and clean, untouched by the debris closer to the palace. The air feels lighter. The sounds of destruction fade into the background. College supporters quicken their pace. One looks behind them every few steps, watching for British troops or local informants. Another quietly reviews the plan. The German consulate is neutral territory, a place that may offer temporary refuge. Whether the British will allow it is uncertain, but it is the only option left. As they approach the consulate gate, the guards there stiffen, startled by the sight. One recognizes Khalid immediately. He hesitates, then steps aside. The gate opens. Khalid rides inside, disappearing behind the walls of foreign protection. His supporters follow quickly, and the gate shuts behind them with a heavy thud. Outside, the street grows quiet again. Only a few civilians linger at the corner, watching the closed gate, whispering among themselves. They know what this escape means. The palace has fallen without negotiation. The leadership has fractured, and the island's political fate has already shifted. The smoke above the palace continues to rise in slow, grey spirals. The war is over, but Khalid's flight marks the beginning of the aftermath that will reshape Zanzibar's future. A new ruler installed. The air outside the palace remains hazy with smoke when the first British Marines reach the ruined gates. Their boots crunch over shattered stone as they step cautiously inside, rifles lowered but ready. The courtyard is a field of debris, broken beams, scorched tiles, fragments of carved wood scattered in uneven patterns. The Marines move slowly, scanning every corner, confirming what the silence already suggests. The defenders have laid down their arms. No one fires. No one resists. The war has ended before many even understood it had begun. A British officer raises his hand, giving the signal to secure the grounds. Marines fan out in steady patterns, some directing wounded defenders to sit along the courtyard wall, others checking for smouldering fires that threaten to spread. Their movements are calm and practiced, a stark contrast to the chaos that ended only minutes earlier. A corpsman kneels beside an injured man, examining a deep cut on his forearm. He wraps it with a clean bandage, while murmuring quiet instructions the man barely hears. In the palace interior, the Marines navigate collapsed hallways where smoke still clings to the air in thick layers. They peer into rooms filled with fallen plaster and torn tapestries. A few surviving palace workers emerge slowly, covering their mouths with cloth. Wary but compliant, one carries a small child whose face is streaked with soot. A Marine gestures them toward the courtyard, guiding them away from unstable walls. Outside the palace district, the city slowly stirs from its shock. People step back into the streets, blinking against the sunlight. The sounds of everyday life, vendors calling, donkeys braying, water being poured from clay jars, begin to return faintly. Yet every sound carries a strange hesitation, as though the city moves through the motions before its spirit fully wakes. Near the harbour, British officials gather beside the consulate. Their expressions are composed, but there is an unmistakable gravity in their demeanour. The war lasted barely longer than a brief argument, yet the consequences are immense. The palace stands in ruins. The former claimant has fled, and the question of succession must be resolved immediately. A small escort of Marines forms around a young man dressed in clean but simple garments. He appears calm, though the tension in his hands betrays a deep awareness of the moment. This is Hamoud bin Mohammed, the man the British have supported for the throne, the one whose claim aligns with their treaties and expectations. He has been waiting through the morning's violence with the restraint of someone who understands how fragile transitions can be. When the consul approaches him, the gathered officials incline their heads slightly in acknowledgement. Words are exchanged quietly, formalities, assurances, and the outlines of what must happen next. Hamoud listens attentively, responding with a reserved confidence. He's not triumphant. He's measured, aware that leadership begins not with celebration, but with stepping into a space left wounded and fractured. The procession begins. Hamoud walks toward the palace district at a deliberate pace, flanked by Marines. Civilians watch from doorways, their eyes following every movement. Some bow their heads, others whisper to neighbors. The presence of the Marines adds a sense of order to the scene, but the tension of uncertainty hangs beneath it. People know that a new ruler brings new adjustments, new alliances, and new expectations. The closer they come to the palace, the more visible the destruction becomes. Smoke rises in slow, uneven plumes from fallen beams. The smell of charred wood mixes with warm dust. Broken pieces of decorative tile glint faintly under the sun. Hamoud pauses once, taking in the sight. His face remains composed, but his breath slows. Whatever he imagined this moment would be, it is now altered by the weight of devastation. The Marines clear a safe path into the courtyard, guiding him past the most unstable areas. The defenders seated along the wall bow their heads respectfully as he passes. A few raise their hands to their chests in a gesture of acknowledgement. Some are too injured to move, others watch him with unreadable expressions. Inside the main hall, or what remains of it, Hamoud steps through debris toward a section of floor that still holds its shape. The ceiling above is cracked but intact enough for the brief ceremony the moment demands. A British officer reads a formal declaration acknowledging Hamoud as the rightful sultan. His voice echoes across the damaged chamber, bouncing off broken walls and splintered beams. Hamoud inclines his head as the declaration ends. A servant places a ceremonial cloth across his shoulders, simple, symbolic, and perhaps the only piece of regalia left unburned. For a moment, the hall grows quiet. Even the crackling of fires seems to soften as the city absorbs the shift. Beyond the palace walls, the news spreads quickly. A new sultan is installed. The bombardment has ended. The island's political future turns in a new direction. In the courtyard, British Marines continue helping civilians and securing the grounds, but the atmosphere begins to ease. Defenders lower their eyes in acceptance. Palace workers return hesitantly to salvage what they can. A group of women approach carrying water jars, offering drinks to wounded men. Their movements are calm, practical, shaped by the understanding that life must continue even where ruin lies. Hamoud steps back into the light of the courtyard. The sun rests on his shoulders like a heavy mantle. He surveys the destruction before him, walls shattered, banners torn, gardens blackened, and then lifts his chin with quiet determination. Whatever comes next will begin here, amid the ruins. A new ruler stands where the old one fell. And although the war lasted only 38 minutes, the consequences will echo through Zanzibar for years to come. News of the war travels faster than the smoke can clear from the palace ruins. Before the dust has fully settled in, Zanzibar word is already spreading along the harbour. Carried first by sailors, then by telegraph operators, then by traders who move from ship to ship with baskets of fruit and eyes full of curiosity. By midday, the story begins its journey outward, drifting across oceans and continents like a rumour too strange to be believed. Down at the docks, foreign sailors gather in loose circles, exchanging fragments of what they have seen. A man from a German merchant vessel gestures broadly with his hands, describing the palace collapsing under the British artillery. A sailor from a Portuguese ship listens with raised eyebrows before repeating the story to someone else, shortening the timeline each time he tells it. 30 minutes, 25, maybe even 20. The numbers shrink quickly, shaped by astonishment and by the irresistible temptation to make history even more dramatic. At the telegraph office near the consulate, men tap messages with quick, practiced movements. A code operator sends a report to London, shaking his head as he double-checks the wording. He has transmitted news of skirmishes, negotiations, and arrests before, but never of a full-fledged war measured in minutes. The machine clacks steadily, carving the story into dots and dashes that will ripple outward in widening circles. By afternoon, the first telegrams reach the mainland ports. In Mombasa, a British administrator reads the message twice, then a third time, wondering whether the operator made a mistake. The idea of a war ending in under an hour feels like a misprint, yet the details leave no room for doubt. He passes the telegram to a colleague who bursts into incredulous laughter before whispering, "Impossible." Further north, in Cairo, a group of journalists receives the news and immediately begins sketching headlines. They argue over wording, swift victory, brief conflict, naval demonstration, before settling on phrases that barely convey the unusual nature of the event. One journalist even drafts a note, suggesting the war could be taught as a lesson in efficiency, an opinion that earns him several unimpressed glares. In the British consulate in Zanzibar, officers review their own reports with meticulous precision. They draft formal summaries, record casualty figures, verify timelines, and collect statements from witnesses. The documentation grows thick quickly, not with tales of extended battle or complex strategy, but with careful descriptions of minutes that passed in rapid succession. One officer writes that the war began at exactly 9:02 a.m. and ended at 9:40 a.m. Another insists the first shot came slightly earlier. They debate these small details, as if the exact second might alter the future understanding of the event. Meanwhile, aboard a merchant ship anchored offshore, a seasoned sailor leans against a rail and retells the story in his own style. He embellishes only slightly, describing flames that reached far higher than they actually did, describing defenders who fought more fiercely than anyone saw, describing the warships firing in perfect unison against breathing smoke. His audience listens eagerly, drawn to the spectacle of it all. Sailors, after all, live on stories as much as on trade wines. In the marketplace, civilians discuss the war in hushed tones. A spice seller recounts how the ground trembled beneath her stall. A fisherman claims he saw the entire bombardment from his boat, though his description places him far closer to the palace than he actually stood. A tailor insists that the war ended before he even finished stitching a single sleeve. People nod at these statements, some believing them, others simply accepting that exaggeration is the easiest way to understand what defies expectations. Children imitate the war with small pebbles and sticks. They line up stones to represent ships and tap them with sticks to mimic cannon fire. Their parents watch them with an easy expression, relieved that danger has passed, yet aware that the memory of the morning will linger in ways too complex for play to capture. Across the Indian Ocean, in Bombay, the story arrives at a British officers' club. Men laugh over their afternoon drinks, shaking their heads in disbelief. One officer remarks that he has spent more time waiting for tea than the duration of the entire conflict. Another claims it is the most efficient war he has ever heard of. Their comments drift between amusement and a sense of triumph, colored by the distance that shields them from the destruction in Zanzibar. Further away, the news reaches London. Newspapers rush to print the story, setting type quickly, eager to report the most striking detail: the war that lasted less than 1 hour. Some papers treat it as a curious footnote in imperial politics. Others present it as a decisive demonstration of British naval strength. Editors choose titles that vary from sensational, the shortest war of all time, to dryly factual, conflict in Zanzibar ends swiftly. Readers raise eyebrows over breakfast, wondering how a war could possibly be shorter than a morning walk. Across the empire, the story takes on a life of its own, fragmented, exaggerated, reshaped, retold. Some describe it as a tragedy, others as a spectacle, still others as an administrative necessity. And yet all agree on one thing: nothing like it has happened before. Back in Zanzibar, the whispers continue long after the guns fall silent. People step around the rubble with a mixture of awe and disbelief, murmuring that the island will be known for this moment for generations. Every voice carries a different fragment of the truth. Some emphasize the speed, some emphasize the destruction, some emphasize the shock, and somewhere in a quiet street near the German consulate, behind a closed gate and shaded courtyard, a man in flight, the former claimant, listens to the same whispers and knows that the world beyond these walls now speaks his name in tones he cannot control. The empire has taken notice, the island has changed, and history has already begun to record the morning that lasted 38 minutes. In the hours after the palace falls silent, Zanzibar settles into a strange, uneasy calm. The morning's smoke has thinned, drifting out over the harbour in soft grey streaks. The sun climbs higher, warming the broken stones of the palace courtyard and brightening the narrow streets where people begin to reappear, walking cautiously as if afraid the war might begin again simply because they stepped too loudly. But the guns are quiet, the war is over, and the island has already begun to reshape itself around the consequences. Inside the palace grounds, British Marines move with methodical precision, marking off unstable areas, helping wounded defenders, and directing civilians away from damaged structures. Their voices remain low, controlled. They are not here to fight anymore, only to secure what is left, to ensure order in a place cracked open by the morning's events. Near the palace gate, piles of debris sit in uneven mounds, fragments of carved balconies, roof tiles, broken beams. Men gather what valuable pieces they can salvage, bits of timber that can be repurposed, decorative tiles that remain intact, documents found beneath fallen plaster. Women bring water jars to help wash the dust from wounds and faces. Children pick through the rubble carefully, their hands brushing aside pieces of stone to reveal objects half buried beneath the collapse. The scent of smoke still lingers in the air, mixing with the sharper smell of the sea carried inland by the afternoon breeze. The heat wraps itself around the city like a thick fabric. Under it all lies a sense of disbelief, not fear now, but something quieter, more reflective. People murmur to each other about how quickly it all happened, how the palace fell in less time than it takes to cook a meal, how the war was measured, not by days or weeks, but by the movement of a single clock hand. In a shaded corner of the palace courtyard, an older man sits on a fallen beam, elbows resting on his knees, watching the Marines move about their tasks. He shakes his head slowly, not out of resentment, but out of astonishment. Wars, in his memory, were stories of long sieges or drawn-out struggles. This one ended almost before it began. He mutters to himself that the island will be telling this story for as long as there is anyone left to hear it. Elsewhere in the city, merchants return to their shops. Some sweep dust from their doorways. Others reorganize goods shaken from shelves during the bombardment. A spice seller sorts through baskets of cloves and cinnamon, relieved to find most survived intact. A jeweler picks up fallen tools from the floor, inspecting each one for damage. Life resumes in slow, cautious increments. But beneath these ordinary motions lies a shift deeper than broken plaster or cracked walls. With Hamoud installed as the new sultan, British influence settles over the island more firmly than before. Treaties will be rewritten. Duties and obligations will change. Decisions once debated by local leaders will now pass through colonial channels with increasing frequency. Some people accept this quietly, believing stability preferable to another morning like the one they just survived. Others bristle, whispering that the cost of peace has come too high, that the palace ruins are a reminder of how quickly autonomy can fall under the weight of foreign power. Not far from the harbour, a group of young men stand on a rooftop staring at the palace. One of them tries to estimate how many minutes each volley took. Another debates whether the defenders could have held out longer if their cannons worked. A third simply stares silently, knowing that no calculation will change the truth. The war was lost the moment the first shot landed, and perhaps even earlier. And behind the walls of the German consulate, Khalid waits in an easy limbo. He paces a shaded corridor, occasionally looking toward the gate, knowing that his temporary refuge cannot last forever. Word has already reached him that the British demand his surrender. He knows he cannot remain here indefinitely, that escape or exile will become his only options. His morning began with a throne. It ends with uncertainty and the narrow hope of fleeing unseen when the opportunity comes. By evening, the smoke drifting above the palace fades into the warm hues of sunset. The colors settle over the courtyard in soft oranges and deep reds, casting long shadows across the rubble. The fires that burned earlier now glow faintly, their embers cracking quietly in the growing dusk. The noise of repair replaces the noise of war. Hammers tapping, voices calling, water splashing onto smouldering wood. Across Zanzibar, life returns at different speeds. Some sit quietly with neighbors, retelling what they saw. Some write letters describing the morning to relatives across the sea. Some retreat into their homes, shaken and needing silence. Others gather near the harbour, staring at the British warships that remain anchored in calm formation, their dark silhouettes sharp against the glowing sky. The island feels smaller now, not physically, but in the way people look at the world, their sense of distance having collapsed into the narrow span of 38 minutes. They understand, perhaps more clearly than ever before, that decisions made in distant capitals can reshape their lives before a pot of tea has time to cool. The palace stands as a fractured reminder, walls cracked open to the sky, floors littered with debris, rooms exposed to the elements. It will be rebuilt, of course. Stones will be replaced. Beams will be lifted, gardens replanted. But something in it will remain changed, marked permanently by the morning when history moved too quickly to comprehend. And yet, as night approaches and lanterns begin to glow along the streets, the city breathes again with a cautious steadiness. People return to routines, meals are prepared, prayers are spoken. Boats tie securely at the docks, the harbour calms, the war is over. But its shock remains, not in the length of the conflict, but in what it revealed, how fragile power can be, how fast certainty can vanish, and how 38 minutes can alter the course of an entire island's future. The day drifts into evening, and the island of Zanzibar settles beneath a quieter sky. The sun sinks low, turning the harbour water into a slow-moving sheet of copper and gold. The heat finally loosens its grip, leaving behind a soft, warm breeze that slides along the streets and through open windows. Lamps flicker to life one by one, their small flames glowing like scattered fireflies against the darkening air. What happened this morning, all the noise, all the shock, all the rushing minutes, now feels strangely distant, as though it belonged to another world entirely. The ruins of the palace lie still, wrapped in the hush that follows exhaustion. A few last wisps of smoke curl upward before dissolving into the dusk. Workers speak in low voices as they gather broken stones into piles, moving with the slow, unhurried rhythm of people who know they have the rest of the night to finish. Farther from the palace, the city resumes its natural pulse. A fisherman hums quietly while mending a net. A woman rinses dust from her doorstep, watching it collect in small swirling pools before flowing toward the street. Somewhere, a distant drum taps a soft, steady pattern that rises and falls like breathing. Even the animals seem calmer. A goat nibbles lazily at a patch of weeds, and a donkey flicks its ears in time with the breeze. Across the harbour, the British ships rest in a silent line, their outlines softened by twilight. They no longer look threatening, only heavy and still, like quiet monuments waiting for darkness. Night folds gently over the island, the air cools, the lights dim, and all the rushing minutes of the day stretch out into long, peaceful hours. You can breathe easier now. History has moved on, the island sleeps.